So we're up to the famous Mishnah on Daf Chav Tes. Kol mitzvahs haben al ha'av. The Gemara is going to vacillate exactly what that means, whether it's a mitzvah that the ben is chayiv to his father or the other way around. Anoshim chayovim v'noshim p'turos. So the obligation is only on men and not on women. So it either means that the mothers are not obligated vis-a-vis their sons, or it means the daughters are not obligated vis-a-vis their fathers. And we'll see the Gemara goes back and forth on that. B'chol mitzvahs ha'av al haben. Let's assume that we're talking now about a mitzvah that's incumbent upon the son vis-a-vis his father, like for example, kibbud av ha'em. Then echad anoshim v'echad noshim chayovim. So there's no difference between a ben or a bas. Kol mitzvah seishas man groma. If it's a mitzvah that only applies during a certain period of time, then anoshim chayovim v'noshim p'turos. Women are exempt. Kol mitzvah seishas lo as man groma. If the mitzvah can be fulfilled at any time, there's no time period that's excluded from the mitzvah. Echad anoshim v'echad anoshim chayovim. Even women are obligated. However, with regard to mitzvahs losa, said this distinction does not hold water. Kol mitzvahs losa said bein shazman grom, bein shlo azman grom, echad anoshim v'echad noshim chayovim. Chutz mi bal takiv, bal tashchus, u bal tatami l'meisa. So if a woman is a bas kohen, she is not enjoined from contaminating herself to the dead, and for sure there's no iser of hakofas harosh or hashchosas pas zokin with regard to women. So these are the only three exceptions to the rule that women are equal to men with regard to all lotus as Shabbat Torah. The Gemara asks, what does the Mishnah mean in the ratio called mitzvah ben alav? Elam, the first Havamina was mitzvah de mechayv bro lemefet li'ava. So the Gemara asks if it's a mitzvah on the child vis-a-vis his father, is noshim p'turos v'atanya. The Torah says in Parashas Kiddushin, ish imo v'aviv tiro. Ish ainli ella ish minayin kshu omer ish imo v'aviv tiro. So the tiro is in lashon rabim erekan shnayim. It's referring to the daughter as well. So the daughter, like the son, shares the identical chiyuv of mora avi em. Rabbi Yehuda hachikam, but rather this is what the Mishnah has called mitzvahs haben amutolos ala av lasos libno. A mitzvah which is incumbent upon the father vis-a-vis his son, anoshim chayovim, a father is obligated, v'noshim p'turos, but a woman is exempt. And that's what we're going to see, the specifics here, that's fleshed out here in the Brisa. Tanina. L'hadatan rabbanan ha'av, chayiv b'bno, l'mulo v'liftoso, l'lamdo torah l'asiya ish l'lamdo umnis, v'yesh omrim aflo shito b'mayim. A father is obligated vis-a-vis his son to circumcise him and to redeem him by paying 5 slayim to the Kohen if he's a Bechar, and to teach him Torah, and to marry him off to a woman, and to teach him a trade. And others say even to teach him how to swim in water. Because let's say he possibly is on a ship that's capsized, and he has to know how to save himself by swimming. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kol She'edom Malamed Es B'ro Umnis Melamdo Listus. And it's as if he doesn't teach his son a trade, it's as if he taught him how to steal, how to become a robber. Listus Salkadaitach. Can you really take this literally? Did Rabbi Yehuda mean to say that if he didn't teach his son an umnus, then he taught him listus? Ella Ki Ilu Melamdo Listus. It's as if he taught him listus. On this piece of Gemara, we have a long discussion. Rabbi Meir says, I won't teach my son anything but Torah. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that getting involved in trade is only in Zman she'eino sim ritzona shel makom harbe asu k'Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. V'lo also beyond many different dimensions. The Rambam in Hilchas Talmud Torah goes on a tirade against those who don't have an income, some sort of work, and dedicate themselves to Torah study, expecting to impose themselves on the community for community help. Lamulo, Minolan. How do we know that the father is obligated to circumcise his son? T'chsiv, Vayomol Avram es Yitzchak beno. And in Parshas, I believe it's at the end of Lech Lecha, if I'm not mistaken, Avram circumcises his son Yitzchak. And this becomes the source for a father and his obligation to circumcise his son. The Pnei Yoshua explains this Gemara as basing itself on the superfluous word beno. It didn't have to say beno. We know that Yitzchak is the son of Avram. Why did it have to say beno? And for that extra word beno, we derive that in general, the chiyuv is on the father. However, if let's say there is no father, or the father did not fulfill this obligation, the fallback position in terms of the chiyuv of milah falls on the shoulders of Bezdin. T'chsiv, as the pasuk says, and this is certainly in Parshas Lech Lecha, Himol Lachem Kol Zachar, and this pasuk is addressing itself to Bezdin. They're chayiv to be mal any zachar if the father did not do so. And the third fallback position, if neither the father nor Bezdin implemented the circumcision, then the son, when he becomes of age, will have to be mal himself. If he doesn't circumcise himself, then he's chayiv kares. But the Gemara wants to know, how do we know that a woman, a mother, is not obligated in the milah of her son? And here we have a very important comment in the Masechet. He points out that milah only applies from the 8th day and on. And therefore, l'chora, at first glance, we would say it comes on the mitzvah seishas man groma. Why is the Gemara seeking up and down for a source to exempt women? And the answer is, and this is offered by many Rishonim, that from the 8th day and on, the mitzvah of milah is no heges tamid, and therefore the mitzvah is considered a mitzvah she'ein hazman groma. However, we have to add another comment here. This machlokas where there's milah balayla. Apparently, our sugya reflects the shita that there is milah even balayla, and therefore it's not a mitzvah seishas man groma. Although one could object, there's no milah on Shabbos. Yeah, but that's only as far as milah shelo b'zmanu. And the Tosfos Rid has another pshat. He says that the chiyuv on the father is to be osek b'achonas in yodei v'tzorchei milah, and preparing for the milah in every way that's necessary is not as man grom. It's not limited in time. And the Gemara now derives from an extra word in the pasuk by Avram that a mother is exempt from maling her child. T'chsiv, with regard to Yitzchak, it says kasher tziva oso elokim, and the pasuk went out of its way to add the word oso as a mute, oso v'lo oso. And again, the question that one could raise is, okay, Sarah Imenu was exempt from this special mitzvah of milah, but that's kodem shenit in the Torah. How do we derive from the fact that Sarah was exempt that any mother is exempt? In any event, Rav in Masechet Avodah Zarah of Zion says that an isha eina kshera lamul biatzma. Why do we need a milah to exclude a mother when a woman's milah is not considered milah? And the answer is, we might have thought that she is obligated to appoint a shliach to see to it that the child is gemalt, and that's not her responsibility, as derived from the pasuk of oso v'lo oso. And the Gemara says, Ashkecha miyad l'doros minol. And how do we know from Sarah Imenu's exemption for all generations that a mother is exempt? And just because Sarah was potter, that doesn't mean that l'doros every mother is potter. And the answer of the Gemara is Tana de Bei Rabbi Yishmael Kol Mokom Shenever Tzav Eino Elazirus Miyad L'Doros. Whenever we see the word Sav, it means that Tzivui Lidoros. Tichsiv, Zerus, Tichsiv, Tzavas Yoshuv Chazkeva Vamtseu, and Miyad Lidoros, Tichsiv, Minayom Asher Tziva Hashem V'Hol Lidoros Sechem. One pasuk is in Dvarim, the 3rd chapter, and the other is in Bamidbar, the 15th chapter. The Tzivui is not just for that time, but for all generations, and that's the Lashon Asher Tziva. And so too, with regard to the mitzvah of Milah, it says that Avram circumcised Yitzchak kasher tziva oso elakim. And the word tziva comes to indicate that for all generations, the obligation is on the father. And since the Torah went out of its way to say oso, it means that for all generations, the mother is exempt. The Mishnah says lifdoso, the Bryce, says lifdoso. Minol, and how do we know a father is obligated to be poda his son who's a bechar? Tichsiv, it says in Parshas Kitisa, Shmos Lamedalad, Kol Bechar, Banecha Tifta. So you see that the Torah obligates the father to be poda his ben who's a bechar, and that's the mitzvah of Pidyon ben, which is incumbent upon the father. The Achronim vacillate, but the chiyuv is on the father even after the child is older, because as we'll see in just 1 minute, the son picks up his own personal chiyuv if his father was not poda him. So maybe the father is just filling in for the son. Or no, it's an independent chiyuv that is incumbent upon the father. And there's a famous tshuva, the Rivash, who says that after the son becomes older, the chiyuv of the father is completely gone, completely removed. Because according to the Rivash, who lived about 6 centuries ago, the mitzvah on the father is to be poda the son in terms of guaranteeing that the son will fulfill his obligation. It's not an independent chiyuv on the father. It's only because the ben is a katan and he's not capable of being poda himself. But once the katan becomes a gadol, then the father is automatically potter from the mitzvah of Pidyon ben. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't see it here, but in the Tshuva the Rosh, he says that's why the father's bracha should be al Pidyon ben, not liftos with the lamed, because liftos with the lamed is indicating my own personal chiyuv. If the father was not poda his son, the son has to be poda himself. Tichsiv tifte, ti poda. We dash in the word tifte as if it said ti poda. We change the vocalizations, which means tifte es atzmacha, ti poda. Make sure that you are poda. And they say about the Vilna Gaon, I don't know if it's true or not, but they don't tell legends like this about you and I, that the Gaon himself was a Bechar, and anytime he met a Kohen and he believed that that Kohen was a Kohen Miyuchas, he went in and he was Poda himself. He was never quite sure if he fulfilled the mitzvah of Pidyon ben because the Kohen may not have been a Kohen Miyuchas. The E and the mother, Minon Delo Mefakto. How do we know that she's not obligated to be Poda her son? D'chsiv ti podeh, tif deh. And we have now a hekesh here between the obligation of the son to be, the Bechar to be Poda himself, and the obligation of the father to be Poda the son. And this teaches us the following principle, Kol shemitzuva liftos es atzmo, mitzuva liftos acher. Just like you're obligated, if you would have been a Bechar to be Poda yourself, so too you're obligated to be Poda others. But Kol she'ena mitzuva liftos atzmo, if you belong to a gender that never ever has the possibility of an obligation to be Poda himself, or shall we say herself, is Eina Mitzuva Liftos Acherim. A woman is not Mitzuva to be Poda herself, and therefore, if she was a Bechora, and therefore she's not Mitzuva to be Poda her son. How do we know that a woman who's a Bechora is in fact not obligated to be Poda her son, herself? Tifteti poda, another hekesh. And it means kol shacheri mitzuva liftoso, mitzuva liftos atzmo. If others have to be poda you, then you're obligated yourself. If others are not obligated vis-a-vis you, then you're not obligated vis-a-vis yourself. So how do we know that others are not obligated to be poda bas bechora? Emphasize the word banecha v'lo b'nosecha. So it means there's a tzivui of tifteh and also tipadeh. And tipadeh means to be poda himself. Tifteh means for the father to be poda the son. If it doesn't have, a person is excluded from tifdeh, then that's because he's not included in tipadeh. Tanarabana, we learned in a brayso, who liftos, upano liftos. A man only has 5 slime. He doesn't have enough money to be poda both himself, he's a bechor, and at the same time to be poda his son, who's a bechor. According to Tanakama, this brayso, who kodem livno, he should be poda himself first. And the reason for that is because the ikar chiyuv is your personal obligation to be poda yourself. And therefore it takes kidima. It gets priority. Rabbi Yehuda says just the opposite. B'no kodma. His obligation as a father is the primary obligation. Shezeh mitzvah shel aviv. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda formulates the principle that we mentioned in the name of the Rivash, that the father's obligation to be poda his son is not an independent obligation, but rather it's an obligation to guarantee that his son has a pidyon. But the ikar chiyuv is on the ben, and therefore he should be poda himself first. So now the question is there any nafkamina here between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda? Well, yes, there is. Because the Tanakama says, who kodem livno? Rabbi Yehuda says, b'no kodem lehu. Why is that so? And Rabbi Yehuda gives an explanation, because mitzvaso al aviv. So it means that Rabbi Yehuda says, not like I suggested, like the Rivash, but perhaps Pugfaker, the opposite of the Rivash, that the Iker mitzvah is not for he himself to be poda himself, but his obligation as a father to be poda his son. And that's the language of Rabbi Yehuda, shezeh mitzvaso al aviv. In other words, the son, when he has to be poda, he's really just filling in for his father. His father is the one who is chayav. V'zeh, and the chiyuv of pidyon haben is mitzvahs b'no olav. The ikar chiyuv is olav, which means that the ikar chiyuv is on the ben. Is the father's chiyuv on the ben? One second here, I just want to make one little correction there. And what we're up to now is Rabbi Yehuda Kol Modim. Rabbi Yehuda is going to constrict the area of the machlokas between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. And he's going to tell you about a case in which everybody agrees and it's a unanimous opinion.